Danette Glassy and Pooja Tandon. Thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Parenting podcast. I'm so glad you guys are here.
Thank you. It's good to see you too.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm excited to be talking about kids and nature, getting kids outdoors in nature. I'd like to start off with kind of like where you're coming from. What I'm curious for you, for me, my childhood was like, I was always outside. When I think of my childhood, I always picture myself outside. I was like biking around the block. I was in the backyard. I was with friends. I did these long bike rides with my dad, or we were even like, if we were just like hanging out, we were always outside. I feel like my parents must have just kicked us out, and then we were outside of the house forever. And I remember there was this one kid who was younger than me who, wasn't allowed to go past. It was some really restrictive thing. Like there was a lot, she was very worried about safety, and we were all like, whoa, this is so weird. You can't even go past like the block. Like that's so crazy. And things are obviously really, really different now. But for you, each of you, what was your experience of growing up? Were you in nature a lot as kids?
I'll go first because mine's not much different than what you describe. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in a suburb, and we had a nice big yard, and we had neighbors who had larger yards with woods and a lake nearby. And really, my earliest memories are being outside as well, and my pretend play and my play with my friends. And so definitely, I think that was the aim of my parents, to get me outside and play as well.
I spent a lot of time outdoors too, but in different ways, I would say. So the first 10 years of my life, I spent mostly in India. And I mean, the indoors, the homes were pretty small, and there were rooftop terraces and front yards. And I definitely remember playing outdoors until it got dark and, had to come back in. But did less of the types of activities that I think of as outdoorsy now. Like we didn't go hiking or camping or bike riding or to national parks or anything like that. But I definitely spent hours and hours playing outdoors and sleeping under the stars just because it was so hot to sleep inside. But then when we moved to the U.S., I grew up on the East Coast in New Jersey. My family were really into getting us outdoors all the time. So then I do remember doing a little bit more of the kind of weekend visits to parks or road trips to national parks. But it was always with friends and family and big groups of people. And so that's sort of a big part of what's shaped my view of why being outdoors is so important for families and children.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I have to amend it a little bit. Like I did a lot of like as a latchkey, I just went home after school as a latchkey kid, and I watched like a lot of Three's Company and just all sorts of like lame reruns. I definitely watched a good amount of TV, but there was a lot of outdoors time. But I used to think like, oh man, I've messed myself. I remember thinking as a young person, like, do I watch too much TV? Am I, there was like people sort of made fun of it in the 80s, and I then remember thinking, oh, maybe I watched too much TV. But now kids are spending kind of an average of 7 hours, I think it is, on screen time a day. It really is eating into outdoor playtime. And is that what you're seeing in your pediatric practices?
I would say it's that twin kind of epidemic of more screen time and more worry from parents and hovering over kids, and less freedom for kids to get out and explore, maybe by themselves or with their friends. So those twin epidemics, I would say, really influenced my wanting to get into this idea of how do we help parents help their children access nature more. So both of those things are happening.
Yeah, the other thing I'll add is that, screens are all around us, and the average age of children getting cell phones in our country is down to like 10 or 11 or so. So, children are surrounded by screens. There are screens in their pockets from a young age. And so I think one of the things that we like to talk about, and we mention it in our book, is this idea of green time. And although everyone kind of laments about screen time, screens are here to stay. And so as we think about, how do we support parents and children and families and finding that balance, and what are the solutions that can be out there, and green time, I feel like, is one possible, antidote or option to screens.
Well, and some of the problems like with kids, I mean, I'm seeing, I think there's more and more stuff coming out, like there's younger children who have a lot of screens are kind of more combative and reactive. I mean, what are some of the things where, I mean, we should, I think, be clear about what the green time is the antidote to. What are some of the problems that this lack of green time is causing?
Yeah, I think, the problems with screens or excessive screen or media use, they're in a couple of categories. I mean, one is the actual act of just being sedentary. Most screen use is sedentary. So the fact that, children are sitting and just consuming this passive information, or even if they're actively engaging, like in video gaming, they're for the most part sedentary, and that comes with a whole range of health issues, from lack of physical activity to unhealthy weight to kind of metabolic, cardiovascular problems. And then there's the actual content of what's what they're consuming, and so that can range from we talked about video games, so violent or fast-moving video games, both of which are problematic for different reasons. The fast-moving part has been linked to, problems sustaining attention, being able to focus on things when you're used to media, moving so fast. There is, advertising for unhealthy products that children might be exposed to. There is cyberbullying and just age-inappropriate content that, especially if there's not limits to the kinds of content on social media, for example. And then the opportunity cost. Any time that you're spending on screens is usually not spent doing something that we might consider better for a child's health, their development, or relationship. So spending time with loved ones, reading, and in this case, especially moving outdoors or spending time in nature, which comes with its own range of health benefits.
Right, so the green time is really, even medical science has corroborated this, really improves the health of kids and can help promote development in a way that certainly the screen times are robbing from and perhaps harming kids. And that's why we were excited to write this book and help families find their ways around the barriers to more outdoor time.
Yeah, the way it's been described to me, that is sometimes that the screens are like a stimulant, act as a stimulant on the brain. I think Victoria Dunkley talked about this in the podcast, that acts as a stimulant in the brain, but you're sitting still, and then when you're off the screen, then that's when, like, attention, behavior, all that stuff, it gets a little crazy from this stimulant effect of this thing, and then also a lack of energy output from actually that sort of sedentary thing. So you were saying, Danette, that green time improves kids' health and development. Can you tell me more about that? What are the ways it improves health and development?
Absolutely. Well, just what you said about the way screens are perhaps making kids more inattentive and disrupting their attention and creativity. Being outside and playing outside has been shown to help improve children's attention span and ready to work, coming back in from maybe recess, and the more green that is, the more the effect. And so it really is this green time versus screen time in a way for that. But there's so many other medical benefits of being in green time. Pooja and her team and her research were able to review all the world's literature on the medical and health benefits of being outside. And Pooja, you should run through all of that from your published study.
Yeah, I can highlight a few key areas, especially. So, I mean, when we looked at this, there were hundreds of studies on the relationship between nature contact and children's health. And then we defined that so broadly in terms of physical health, mental health, learning, all the things that we think are important for children's well-being. And the strongest evidence base is for physical activity and mental health. So those are the two areas that when children spend time in nature, in parks, even live near green space or parks, so neighborhoods or schools that have more green space and nature access, they tend to engage in more movement and more physical activity, which we know is so critical for their health and development, and also is related to improved mental health. And we know that given the kind of really another epidemic or pandemic, if you will, of especially youth mental health problems right now, how important those are. So I would say physical activity, mental health are the key areas, but benefits for everything from improved vision, like benefits to children that spend more time outdoors or have lower odds of needing glasses, for example, for distance vision, to just developing like their motor skills development and creative play and social connections and interacting with others. So yeah, a whole range of benefits that for children.
It's amazing. We never thought about that when we were the kids were just getting kicked out of the house in the 80s, and no one was saying, oh, it'll benefit their creative play and social connection and their vision too. But actually, I don't even need glasses. Maybe it was all that, like getting kicked out of the house as a kid. But it's interesting because in your book, so their book is Digging into Nature, Outdoor Adventures for Happier and Healthier Kids. You talk about how much outdoor play or physical activity kids need per age in different ages. And I think this is so fascinating because there's one age bracket that really truly stands out so enormously. And it's so funny because I often check in with kids. This is where we have some of the biggest challenges, and we have coaching calls with kids this age and all this. You talk about infants need 30 minutes of tummy time, toddler 12 months old to 36 months old, they need 60 to 90 minutes of outdoor playtime each day. But then kids age 3 to 5, which is it's such a challenging age for us parents, right? Need at least 3 hours of physical activity per day, or about 15 minutes for every hour they are awake, which is pretty amazing. 3 hours. And I'm wondering, that seems like it's probably really hard for adults to accommodate 3 hours of physical activity per day for kids age 3 to 5 these days. What are you seeing in your pediatric practices or in the studies on that?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what, as we started to, both of us independently and then together, started to think, how can we help families? It's not that people don't want to do this for their children, or they don't have fond memories of maybe playing outside by themselves, or when they were growing up themselves. It's the barriers, and certainly time and access to safe green space, weather. We've really got several iterations of where we've asked parents these things and found out it's recurrent on those probably 4 and sometimes others. And so really we're encouraging families to really sit back and say, well, why aren't my kids playing that much, and how can I, if it's time, and how can I do that after work or whatnot? That's where you turn to your child care or your schools, your extended neighbors and families and friends, and look for ways that you can increase a child's outdoor time. Just make sure that their child care is providing that outdoor time, or that their schoolyard is more than just a big asphalt foursquare and jump rope opportunity. And weekends, maybe do more on weekends. So the time and access can be hard. It's always more awe-inspiring and creative if your child is able to explore a green space a little bit on their own. And so making sure that there's that safe access to that. Not every child has a yard. Not every child has a park within 10 minutes of their home. Not every child has one that's safe and could could go explore. And so we've got lots of ideas that we've put in there to help families get around that. And then for weather, especially there are more extreme weather all across North America, right, where your listeners are probably listening from, the extreme cold or the extreme hot, or in our case, people really complain about the rain and don't want to go outside and help their young children explore that, or get their older kids to go outside in the rain. And so we talk about how you can do that with the right clothes or gear. How do you know when it's too hot or too cold? It does take some mindful planning to make sure you're thinking about what's holding you back and how you can get around that. Pooja, I know you have lots of ideas too for families about getting around the barriers.
I mean, I think the biggest one is what you started with, is that it's not just, the responsibility of the parents or the family unit. Children have many, many waking hours, but they're not always with their parents or the adults in their family. And so to me, and as a parent, I worked full time through, most of my kind of when my children were preschool years, and really appreciate the preschool teachers, the family friends, the neighbors, the family members, and really thinking about, what are those indoor activities that we can bring outdoors? What are the things that whether it's a play date or a celebration, or even doing for older children homework, for younger ones maybe crafts or music or art, eating. So like thinking about times in your day that you're spending indoors, that, could this be done outdoors? Could this be done with somebody else in charge?
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's think about, so there are these barriers, time, access, and weather, but maybe like before we get into sort of the barriers, what do you envision as being the ideal? Like, what are we shooting for? We're shooting for, obviously, with kids age 3 to 5, 3 hours of physical activity a day, and for others 60 to 90 minutes a day. What do you envision as like the green time that really is restorative as the ideal first, and then let's kind of get into maybe some of the ways that we can be creative about problem solving where it's challenging.
And just to be clear, those recommendations are for physical activity, so they don't have to be outdoors. They're not exactly the same as outdoor time. So there's sort of the Venn diagram of like ideal physical activity, and we want as much of it to be outdoors as possible. We think that there are additional benefits to moving outdoors. In fact, for adults especially, there's research that talks about green exercise. So, when they've done studies that when an adult runs on a treadmill indoors versus running on a beautiful path through the woods, that there are additional benefits to their mental restoration and their stress response.
Yeah,
that
I definitely feel that.
Yeah. And I think, many of us have experienced that, walking indoors versus, in a mall or versus outdoors in a park. So there is that piece. So I think that as much as possible, we want that physical activity to be outdoors, but recognize that if that's not possible, then movement is better than no movement. And sometimes, that has to be indoors, whether it's, in all different ways. But Danette, you look like you want to say something.
Piling on families for just another thing that they've got to make sure is just right. The ideal greens is whatever you can access. I have to say, even if you're stuck in a high rise and looking out the window, being intentional about watching for birds or cataloging the clouds or the phases of the moon, bringing pine cones and rocks indoors, to everything that, of course, a beautiful park with trees and water and green and fresh air and free movement. For kids also, there's another dimension of the ideal green time, and that is, we know there's benefits of playing with your parents and your caregivers, that interactive, building your relationship together and bringing along developmental milestones in that interactive way is is on steroids when it's outdoors and in a green space, but also letting children figure out what they're going to do in this green space, whatever it is, whatever you can access, whenever you can access it, through whoever you can access it, because children who are bored are naturally, their curiosity is more stimulated, I think, in a natural area than that pile of toys they've been looking at for the last 6 months. And of course, then solving problems and being stimulated. One of the important things about like gross motor development for the under 6-year-old group is being able to move on uneven surfaces and starting to climb, and you're not going to get that as easily indoors. And so any outdoor space, even if you're walking down the street in a city, you're going to start to get some of that stimulation and improvement in your gross motor skills or big motor skills that way. The fine motor skills, if you're trying to pick up every little tiny stick and create a little village for imaginary fairies who are coming later, it's going to stimulate your fine motor or small motor skills. So we could go on, and we did in the book. But
yeah, there's so many ideas. I loved that. That was a big thing the cousins did for my daughters when they're up at my parents' houses. There was a lot of fairy house building. But you're talking about, just to kind of paint the picture of the ideal, is like I'm just kind of imagining, encouraging the listener to say, like, hey, let's practice to, like, maybe, it's time to get yourself a really good, if you have the resources, get a really good cushion get yourself to actually go camping, or try to do some things that are a little maybe outside your comfort zone if you don't like mosquitoes or you don't like bugs or things like that. But maybe this might be something that's good for you to try to do for the sake of your kids. Like, what are some of the, do you see one of the barriers being just kind of adults and our challenges and our attitudes and our wanting to be comfortable? Is that one of the things that kind of holds people back?
I think that, yes, I think that what we as adults or as parents, like our own experiences and perspectives on outdoor times, influence so much how we parent and how we think about the outdoors for our children. And we do address that specifically. I mean, sometimes it's a parent attitude. Sometimes it's a child who is, for whatever reason, have decided that they are not an outdoorsy person or don't feel comfortable. There are probably a lot of, socialization and what they're been exposed to. And there's a couple of, many different ways to approach it. But one thing we talk about is this idea of nature mentors and nature allies. And again, going back to the idea, like, you don't have to do this alone. And there are others out there that are probably doing it. So I love what you said about just maybe pushing yourself a little bit, but it doesn't have to, if it's not a comfort zone, you don't have to go backpacking in the next month, but maybe finding some other families with children similar ages, or neighbor, somebody who's, willing to go on a hike with you or tell you about an easy trail that you've never done, or even a picnic in the park, with family members or a group that you're already comfortable with. And I think especially as children get older, or if they're the reluctant ones, including friends or, similar age peers. So kids from a sports team, a club, a class, classmate, can be just that little push you need to try something new. And as parents, I feel like we're doing that all the time, like maybe trying to encourage our children to try things or do things that we may not feel 100% comfortable with, and discover that we actually like this more than we might have imagined.
One of the things that I was going to just share, one of the things that my kids did that I think has been the amazing, that made me, I love that they're actually really big nature freaks now, which is wonderful. My senior wants to go study botany, and my youngest daughter is really into animals, but they both did Scouts. They actually did like the Scouts BSA, which is, they had an all-girls Boy Scout troop, but it was wonderful because they went camping like every month of the year. My daughters are like Navy SEALs. They've gone camping when it was like 9 degrees something I would never, ever, ever, ever want to do. Like I do, maybe a camp once a year. I don't know, but so there are wonderful organizations like Scouts, which I think has been great for us anyway, and as well.
Right. Even for children who have maybe mobility issues or mobility disabilities or other special health care needs, there are lots of organizations that are available to help children get more nature exposure and accommodate what they might need. And the part of the country that you live in and what's available. If there's not scouting, maybe there's 4-H. And many others that maybe your local groups are curating. And then the whole idea of maybe just go explore a park every week or once a month or picking out parks and go see what's there. If you can swing that in your limited amount of time.
Yeah, and I think after school programs and summer camps are just perfect ways for families that either the parents don't feel comfortable, don't have a lot of experience or time or nearby resources to connect your child with a summer program or an after school program that does. And that was for us when we used to think about summer camps, because we needed year-round childcare, and summer camps were part of that. Is I always tried to choose at least one or two themes or camps that pushed my children's boundaries a little bit in directions that the school or kind of the academic year didn't. So whether that was cooking or wilderness exploration, there are kind of different ways to do it, and I think including a nature-based experience is a wonderful way to do that.
What do you do? What do you suggest for parents who have kids who are highly sensitive or have fears about bugs or heat or cold? Like, what should parents like that do?
It's very normal and predictable that at certain phases in a child's development, they will have fears like separation anxiety or after experiences, fear of bugs or things like that. So it is common. I think it's something that nearly every parent has to face, is helping your child through a fear or a reluctance to do something that you want them to do. And certainly the way we always recommend parents to start is to think of yourself as that scaffold to help the child lean on and build their competence and acceptance of what has been frightening them or making them not want to do something. So meet your child where they're at, talk about it first, understand what is the fear or the reluctance, because you may be assuming it's this and it's really this, and there's an easier way over there. And then talking about what might help, reading about how other people maybe have gotten through this. There's lots of children's books about bugs and things like that. And then encouraging and recognizing any steps forward, taking it slow. First let's try it let's try going outside and seeing what bugs fly by us when we're just outside the front door. And if it's too much, we'll go back inside. That baby steps kind of way that you're scaffolding that up. And really watching your child for that. Now it's too much. We need to back up. Be patient. Be patient with the process. There could be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe 3 steps back, and start over. And there's little fears and there's big ones, there's little reluctances and big ones. But I think taking that idea that you're going to be the scaffold and being patient with the process is really important.
I'll also add that, being outdoors or being in nature can look like a lot of different things, and you don't have to, camp or necessarily be amongst bugs. I mean, an older child might be interested in nature photography or nature art. So I think that, and there may be camps or activities or just something you come up with that helps ease that transition so that it's not that you have to, sleep outdoors or anything like that, but you might try gardening or you might try photography or an outdoor sport. I mean, for some children that are kind of inclined towards sports or, team sports, and that's kind of all they do, and it takes up a lot of their time, getting them into mountain biking or kayaking or, if those things are available, or again, those programs, those might be ways that they'll enjoy either, the movement or competitive aspect of being outdoors, but also kind of soaking in some natural settings and while doing.
Yeah, and you have a lot of great. So the book has lots of great tips for, overcoming all those barriers we talked about earlier as well, and including like how to get, as I know from the the REI prices, like it can be expensive to get out in nature and like in certain weather, right? And you have tips for how to find great rain or snow clothes for your kid at low or no cost, etc. All kinds of different ways to kind of overcome different things, even for kids who have mobility challenges. What do you suggest for, what are some of the things that help people with mobility challenges?
One of the great innovations that Google has done with Google Maps just in the last couple of months is you can look on a Google map and find all the parks nearby. And if you click on that, they've curated in most areas now what amenities might be there. And so are there trails that are wheelchair accessible, or paths that a child with crutches might be able to move along? The other thing is, if you're on this idea of let's check out all the parks in our county, you can go to the park website and see what the accommodations are there. Everything, of course, from the paths that are more accessible or boardwalks along shorelines to even wheelchair mats that are put down in sandy beaches and whatnot. And then there are the programs. Nearly just looking around the country and talking to pediatricians around the country, there are many nonprofit organizations that are state departments of children with special health care needs that are bringing groups together to help children experience nature despite their disability or even with their disability. So there's lots of ways that you can do that. And of course, depending on their disability, right within your home or in your yard, at your school, being sure to talk to the administration about how are we going to make sure my child with autism is having some outdoor time, and here's what we do at home. I need you to do this at school, kind of accommodations.
I love that. And a lot of parents who listen to the podcast have kids who are dealing with attention deficit disorders, ADHD. Does that? I am at my imagination is that it's time in nature is only going to be good for that. Am I right about that?
Yes, 100%. And there's actually research. I mean, there are and really good studies where they've worked with children with ADHD and compared how they perform on kind of attention and executive function. So these tasks that often can be challenging for children with ADHD, as part of having ADHD, they have them spend time and walk through a forest versus spend time on a busy urban street and then complete those tasks. And many other studies where kind of just movement and physical activity is shown to be beneficial. So children, after being physically active, are better able to focus. And so yes, 100%. And I've worked on some projects as well in my kind of research life where we are working with families of children with ADHD to give them tips and tricks on how to support children with movement behavior. So getting enough physical activity, limiting screen time, and enough sleep. So sort of that 24 hours of movement. We think of it 24-hour movement behaviors, and a good solid body of evidence that shows that that can be a really important part of their management of ADHD.
Yeah, to me, it only makes sense. Like, we evolved to be another animal in nature, as all animals are in nature, right? And that as we separate ourselves to be more comfortable in our little houses, our boxes, and things like that, then it makes us disconnected. It causes us to suffer. It wasn't the environment we evolved to be in, which like creates more homeostasis for us, right? So it makes so much sense to me. I once lived in the city, and I was like, no, I gotta get myself to a place with trees. That was important for me. Not that it's bad if you live in a city, dear listener, but for me, it was not going to work. But it just makes a lot of sense to me that as we see all these studies, like the forest bathing and all of these different things that show that how our systems are just calibrated to being out in nature. I even saw something that said, the larger the body of water you were in front of, the more it was like soothing to the nervous system. I was like, oh my God, no wonder I love the ocean so much. No wonder everyone's obsessed with it, right? It makes so much sense. I love that you're putting this out here so to kind of overcome all these barriers that help overcome all these barriers that can get in our way. Is there anything that we miss that you want to share with the listeners?
One thing that I thought of when you were just speaking about, children with ADHD or just any range of behavioral challenges that we've heard from teachers, preschool teachers, grade school teachers, that often the children that are quote problematic or having challenges sitting still in a classroom, they thrive when they're outdoors or when they go to an environmental education program or an overnight kind of nature program. And so really, I think it can be really empowering for children like that maybe have started to think of themselves as, problem kids or not good students, to be in environments that are more conducive to the ways that they like to learn and they need to learn. So I wanted to just sort of put that out there as well.
I guess I would like to add that it's not just children who benefit from nature time, but parents and caregivers do too. And that certainly makes you a better caregiver and parent when your cup is filled up with some nature as well. And it doesn't have to be all the hours that we list. It's just what you can do, and striving for more and more creative ways. It's good for everyone in the family.
I love it. What a beautiful place to end. Danette Swanson Glassy and Pooja Tandon. I'm going to include your middle names this time. Are pediatricians and the authors of Digging into Nature: Outdoor Activities for Happier and Healthier Kids. This has been such a pleasure. I hope that we help get more people outside, even if it's winter. These doctors have help for you in digging into nature, so go check it out. Thank you so much for sharing and for coming on the Mindful Parenting Podcast today.
Thank you so much
for
your interest.